Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Well, after a week hiatus, I'm finally back. I would have been back earlier, however, but the last couple days here, there was a power outage due to a snowstorm that knocked down tree branches and tree branches that in turn knocked down power lines. But the power's back on today, and I'm back at it. And what I want to do today is I want to review a book that I promised I would review late last year. It's a book by Garrett Graff. It's called UFO, The Inside Story of the United States Government's Search for Alien Life Here and Out There. Now, Garrett Graff, I never even heard of the guy until late last year, November, when all of a sudden he started showing up on some mainstream news channels talking about UFOs and all the ongoing action in Congress and all of that stuff. And right away, I understood why this guy was on TV, because you could tell that he was an establishment hack. He doesn't subscribe to the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and he doesn't believe that there's governments covering anything up with regards to crashed alien saucers or reverse engineering programs and all that. And that's why he was brought on TV. Now, this guy, he's no dumb guy. Let's just make it clear. The book, by the way, I'll say this: it's well written and it's well researched, but only half-assed, in a half-assed manner, because he basically resorts to debunkers for the most part for his sources, as well as official statements from the Pentagon, from the United States military, from the Air Force, things like that. Anyway, this guy, he's written some other books before. In fact, he wrote a book about Watergate, which was very well received. And he also wrote a book called The Only Plane in the Sky about 9/11, another book that was acclaimed. And now he comes out with this UFO book. And I remember last year, November, when I heard this guy's name for the first time, I was like, I never even heard of him. This guy's never been involved in researching the UFO subject. I don't know who this person is. That's because he never did before. This was his first time that he dipped his toe into this subject. He was a former editor at Politico magazine. He's the editor-in-chief of Washingtonian magazine in Washington, D.C., and also he's an instructor at Georgetown University in the Masters in Professional Studies Journalism and Public Relations program. So this guy is well connected. He's based basically in Washington. And so this is, he decided, according to the acknowledgments in the back of his book, he decided that what spurred him into writing this book, into doing the research for it and producing it, was a comment that he heard from the former CIA director, John Brennan, who in 2020 made this statement: "Some of the phenomena we're going to be seeing continues to be unexplained and might in fact be some type of phenomenon that is the result of something that we don't yet understand, and that could involve some type of activity that some might say constitutes a different form of life." So pretty much when he heard that comment, that set him off. That was what spurred him initially to become interested in this subject. Hearing a comment like this from a former CIA agent of the pedigree of a John Brennan, got his attention, Garrett's attention. Unfortunately, though, what he does in this book, it's not complete. I mean, it doesn't have all the facts, and it seems to be done deliberately. I mean, it has to be done deliberately. This guy is a Harvard grad. And he's very intelligent. Like I said, he's already had some other books. The book is well written, well researched. It's filled with annotations. It has it all except the truth. And basically, he steers away from the truth. I mean, I don't have a problem. I mean, if you're going to put a book out like this, you need to be objective. And unfortunately, that's not what you're getting here. Basically, it's so I can't imagine that this guy is that ignorant, because he couldn't be. He's too smart for that. So what he did he deliberately did this, wrote the book in this way, because he knew that the establishment would like something like this. They would rather see a book like this and have someone who researched UFOs like Garrett Graff talking about it on TV, basically to dispel it, because that's what he did. I said last year when I initially was talking about this guy that he's an establishment hack. because he's basically towing the Pentagon line. He doesn't subscribe to the extraterrestrial hypothesis for the most part. He doesn't believe in the cover-up, and he took it from that standpoint. He stayed away from research of people like Stanton Friedman for in a lot of cases, and resorted to research done by debunkers. And it's like this throughout the book. I'm going to go through certain sections of this book, and I'll give you some examples of how he's basically, it's deceiving, it's deceptive. And to me, as far as I'm concerned, that's a hoax. When you're lying by omission, I mean, you're trying to trick people. I mean, that's what this is. I mean, if you go to the Merriam-Webster dictionary online, it says a hoax is an act intended to trick or dupe. Now, that's what happens here. If you have a casual interest in UFOs and you were to read this, you would be duped. You would be tricked because he's not giving you the full story, and it has to be deliberate because this guy's too smart to do otherwise. He would have known about other research, but he just stayed away from it. In fact, Stanton Friedman, the late Stanton Friedman, the nuclear physicist, talked in a lot of his publications about the debunkers' principles of logic, and Garrett Graff meets all of these for the most part. I would say all 10 of these. It says, what the public doesn't know, don't tell them. That's most certainly the case with Garrett Graff's UFO book. Don't bother me with all the facts. Well, that's pretty much the same thing. He doesn't want to list. He doesn't want to consider all the rest of the facts. Only the facts that help with the narrative that we really don't know what UFOs are. That's what his narrative is. But when we get to at some point, we'll figure out some sort of natural phenomena. That's basically what his narrative is. Okay. Another one. Absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Of course. Select the data that matches your conclusions. That's what he does here brilliantly. What this book is. It is a brilliant piece of propaganda. It's brilliant propaganda. That's what this is, and that toes the Pentagon line. That basically informs the media. Just go back to sleep. There's nothing to see here. I did all the research. You can read my book, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And that's what it's doing. And then for the casual person, a person with a casual interest, I'd put them to sleep too. Another one. If at first a scenario supporting your theory crumbles under the weight of the facts, try again to prop up your theory with another scenario, then another, then another. Well, you can't really say Garrett Graff is guilty of that here. This is his first time that he's dipped his toe into this subject. Hearsay testimony is acceptable if it supports you, but unacceptable if it supports the other guy. Well, I think that is the case here because there's many instances here where he'll provide commentary from a debunker that they don't really have any. That's all. It's just a comment from a debunker, but it doesn't really provide you anything. It doesn't they're speaking. A debunker says something, and you use that comment like it's gospel. That's so that he is guilty of that in this. It's important to be right. I don't know if that applies to him. Loudly proclaim the strength of your testimony. Okay, well, I don't know how he's very loudly proclaiming the strength of the testimony because look, he was all over TV last year, all over the mainstream news, and he has a book published. He got to promote his book, so yeah. Another one. Pepper your publications with references to as many personal, i.e., unverifiable interviews as possible. Well, no, I don't say he did this. And then finally, don't mention references that don't support your theory. The public won't know the difference. Yes, bingo. He does. He is guilty of that. So I'm gonna provide you some examples of some of the things that I found in this book that just informs me that this book was designed to be written this way. See, this guy knew what he was doing. I mean, he's already in the part of the Washington establishment. He's working at Politico before. He's doing this Washingtonian magazine. He's written some other books before. He knows how to do it. He figured probably this is my feeling on what happened here. It's not like somebody from the government approached him and say, "Hey, Garrett, why don't you write a book that pretty much debunks the UFOs? Why don't you do that?" I don't believe that that's probably what happened here. He probably figured that if I write a book that is very skeptical, from does everything from a skeptical viewpoint or a debunking viewpoint, and I don't use all the data, and this will be appreciated by the establishment, and they'll give me some press. They'll have me on TV, and that's what he probably figured. That's what I believe most likely happened. But you go through this book, and I need to use my glasses for this. It says here, like, he's talking about, of course, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of everything, because a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about during this review of this book are things that I've talked about a number of times, like Roswell, for instance. He talks about everything. In fact, I just want to point that out. He goes through the whole gamut from the Tic Tac videos to alien abductions to the MJ-12 documents, to Roswell, everything. He covers pretty much as he possibly could, and so it's over a 500-page long epistle, by the way, and it's like, again, it's well put together. However, it's very cleverly put together. It's a clever piece of propaganda. That's what it is. And he talks about for instance, he talks about the Roswell incident here on page 248. He's talking about Jesse Marcel, about how years later he had a different story to tell after not talking about it. Jesse Marcel, of course, he was the top intelligence official at the Roswell Army Airfield back in 1947, and he's one of the people who handled some of the wreckage, some of the material. And then, of course, as we all know, in the late 70s, he went public with that it wasn't no weather balloon that I was handling. It was the wreckage from something that could not have been of this earth. But anyway, it says here on page 248, it says Marcel had a very different story to tell. What he'd taken from the ranch 3 decades before was no ordinary weather balloon, but exotic materials from outer space, dotted with hieroglyphics and possessing properties unlike anything known on Earth. The debris he had posed with for news photographers back then had been a ruse. So he's talking about those two famous pictures, seven photos in all, I believe. The two famous pictures with Jesse Marcel holding obvious remnants from this a weather balloon, right? And what does Garrett Graff do here? He has it annotated, and you go down to the annotation to see what he says about it. It says here about the claim about Marcel's claim. It says, this claim alone was easy enough to disprove. There were 7 photos taken in 1947 at the air base, 2 with Marcel, and the record is the same in all the images. So basically, he's calling Marcel a liar, that all these years later, that what Marcel's story was that when he was flown from Roswell to Fort Worth, Texas, where he met with his superior, General Roger Ramey, who Ramey informed Marcel that, don't say anything, I'll do all the talking, we're going to meet with the press right now. They meet with the press, a photographer comes in, starts taking pictures, and Marcel is ordered to basically pose with some of this phony, the stuff that he had brought. Some of the records that he had brought with him from Roswell was replaced with obvious weather balloon stuff, right? So Garrett Graff here is just saying that basically he's calling him a liar, Marcel a liar. But Marcel's story has been all these years is that the stuff that he brought to Fort Worth and the stuff that he posed with was not the stuff that he had found at the Foster Ranch, the stuff that the rancher Mac Brazel had shown him, that had brought the attention to the Air Force so stuff like that. And then they're talking about, then he goes on, he's there talking about Stanton Friedman and William Moore. William Moore actually wrote a book using a lot of Friedman's information in 1980, the first book about Roswell called The Roswell Incident. Moore and also Charles Berlitz. But anyway, it says here, they're talking about that. It says, to bolster their argument, Friedman and Moore cited witness testimony from a long-dead civil engineer named Grady Barney Barnett, who had recounted stumbling upon the crashed disc in the desert, surrounded by archaeology students from an unnamed Eastern university who had chanced upon the wreckage. Together they had examined the alien bodies, hairless, with round heads and small, oddly spaced eyes. Again, there's another annotation after that, right? And the annotation this time is a comment from James Moseley, the late James Moseley, who was a UFO skeptic, debunker, and not only that, but a UFO hoaxer. He did some UFO pranks. Why would you have this annotation here. It doesn't make any sense from somebody who was a debunker skeptic talking about this. But here's what he says. The comment, the annotated comment here from Mosley. It says, if one accepted these tales, then in the late 1940s and early 1950s, saucers were dropping out of the air like flies. If the saucer beings were smart enough to travel safely through space over distances of billions and billions of miles, how likely was it that they'd be dumb enough to crash by the dozens once they got here? Okay, this is the same kind of comment we hear from a lot of debunkers today. If they're so smart, why are they crashing? You hear this from Neil deGrasse Tyson a lot, too. You're not going to come all the way here and then they're going to crash. Okay, here's the thing. They don't take this into consideration. Well, look at the human race. I mean, look, we had how come if we're so smart and we're so advanced like we are advanced for from where we were 200 years ago, for instance, then why do we have Discovery crash or the Challenger disaster? Why do we have all this money and time and effort and intelligence poured into these trips into space, but yet somehow they failed and blew up? I mean, what are we talking about here? How do they know? How do they know that technologically advanced beings from other planets still can't have accidents? Their argument doesn't make any sense. Anyway, moving on. Then he also talked about how Friedman called it a cosmic Watergate, and that it was the UFO, and that the Roswell story is basically the most important story of the past millennium. And then later on page 350, in a subsequent chapter, Roswell Revisited, it says Graff comes to the conclusion that it was probably that balloon's wreckage that Mac Brazel had found, and it was unsurprising that neither he nor intelligence officer Jesse Marcel nor the officials at the Roswell Air Base did not immediately recognize it as such. The mogul balloons, after all, were enormous, giant trains of balloons, over 30 of them, plus experimental sensors strung together and stretching more than 600 feet. A setup, in other words, that very well might have created a larger than normal wreckage field filled with all sorts of gadgets, gizmos, metal, and debris. Okay, so Graff comes to the conclusion that that's what it was, gadgets, gizmos, and other metal and debris, and Marcel, a top intelligence official at Roswell Army Airfield back at that point, didn't know the difference between that, along with other people, and which is absolutely absurd. Because in the Roswell Legacy, written by Marcel Jr., Jesse Marcel Jr., the late Jesse Marcel Jr., unfortunately, he talked about this, and he said that his father, he knew exactly what that stuff. And actually, Jesse Marcel Sr., when he was alive, said he knew what it was. He says, as I stated before, my father had just gone through radar school where he studied radar targets similar to the one he was ordered to hold for the photo session. In essence, the government implied that my father couldn't even tell the difference between a box kite and a P-51 Mustang. Such claims just made no sense. So there's no way that Marcel could have made that kind of mistake. I mean, there's just no way. He just went to he knew what this material was, and no, anybody would have known that it was just insignificant. That it was just, this is just balloon material. There's some aluminum foil here or foil type material, and some balsa sticks. That's about it. And the radio that they're talking about here was nothing. It was just this little cylinder shaped object that had a radio. There's no way that Marcel would have known, would have made that kind of mistake. In fact, according to the government itself, the materials that made up a mogul balloon was 28 neoprene balloons. The balloon that they say crashed. Well, a balloon doesn't crash, for one thing, but the government itself says the materials that were part of this mogul balloon that allegedly everyone made a mistake and thought it was a flying saucer. It was made of 28 neoprene balloons, a sonobuoy microphone, dry cell batteries, and an FM transmitter, 4 Raywind radar targets composed of balsa sticks and metallized paper, multiple plastic tubes containing a liquid ballast dribbler system, 3 silk canopy parachutes, and 600 plus feet of braided nylon cord. Now, none of the stuff that that they're talking about here. Now, Jesse Marcel Jr. saw these materials too, and none of it was what he saw. His father actually brought some of that debris back to his home in Roswell before he brought it to the base, and he showed his son and his wife. And Marcel Jr. said it was none of that stuff that they saw on his kitchen floor that night. So, but this book is not. This book here, The Roswell Legacy by Jesse Marcel Jr. That's not one of the sources for this piece by Garrett Graff. I think my biggest problem with this book was when he gets into Majestic 12. And that's where I have some major issues, because he comes to the conclusion, of course, as we all know, Majestic 12 was there were some documents that were leaked, sent in the mail to UFO investigators back in the early 1980s. It was a briefing document that was intended to be presented to President-elect Dwight Eisenhower in 1952 when he was assuming office, and Graff comes to conclusions there that this was all totally bogus. And you know what? There's a lot of people, to his credit, there's a lot of people in the UFO community who believe the same thing. I don't. I've actually read about Majestic 12 from Stanton Friedman in his Top Secret Magic book from that he published actually initially in the mid 90s, and then I have the later edition that was republished in 2005, which includes a new afterword that wasn't in the original version. But he comes to the conclusion that there was all these issues with MJ12, and all the issues that Graff presents here, it's all from debunkers. This book here that was published by Stanton Friedman, it's not one of his sources. He uses sources including the late Philip Klass, and all the information that he's basing his opinion on here, Graff, it's based on debunker issues with this that were later debunked by Stanton Friedman, and it's incredible. He goes, here's what he says. This is on page 316, and this is in the chapter MJ12. It says, experts pointed to the top secret restricted information moniker on the memo as compelling proof that some doctoring had taken place, since the notation didn't come into existence until the Nixon administration. Then archivists examined Robert Cutler's schedule. Robert Cutler was a special assistant to Eisenhower, and there was a memo that was actually discovered at the National Archives by UFO investigators a few years after they received in the mail the MJ12 briefing document. It was called this other document that they found at the National Archives was known as the Cutler Twining memo. It was a memo from Robert Cutler to General Nathan Twining, talking about a meeting with the president to discuss a meeting of the MJ12, which in essence then proves that there was MJ12. That document was actually found at the National Archives. But so it says here, continuing, it says, then archivists examined Robert Cutler's schedule and found that he'd been overseas for the first half of that month, touring U.S. installations in Europe and North Africa, which meant he wouldn't have been in a position to write a routine scheduling memo on July 14th. And there was, of course, the question of the president. The briefing memo had been written as if the existence of aliens and UFOs would all have been news to Dwight Eisenhower. If there was indeed a cover-up of aliens and UFOs during the summer of the Arnold sighting and Roswell crash, surely it would have involved telling the man who was the commander of both the U.S. Army and Army Air Forces. Okay, and I'm going to go through these issues that he has here one by one here. Okay, first off, the top secret restricted information. Actually, Friedman himself, in the afterword in his Top Secret Magic, talks about this. He says, another troublesome aspect of the Cutler Twining memo was the use of the strange security marking Top Secret Restricted. As I had noted in Chapter 5, I had seen confidential restricted and secret restricted, but not any top secret restricted documents. However, in going through the 400-page plus General Accounting Office report on their efforts to locate Roswell-related material, mostly pretty dull stuff, I noted on page 80 the following statement. And this was from the General Accounting Office of the United States that actually sent this, made it clear here that they found other documents that did have that security marking. It says, and this is what they said, the General Accounting Office. It says, Miss LJ and I reviewed records pertaining to the Air Force's atomic energy and certain mission and weapons requirements. These files were classified up to and including top secret. The period covered by these records was from 1948 to 1956. There was no mention of the Roswell incident. No information pertaining to the assignment was obtained. In several instances, we noticed the classification top secret restricted and on several documents. This is mentioned because in past references to this classification, Majestic 12, we were told that it was not used during this period. So they actually showed there, they let you know right there that it was used. So that's another, and then moving on here, he talks about Robert Cutler being overseas, right? That was another interesting thing that Stanton Friedman talked about in this book. Cutler was overseas, and he actually had let his assistant know to keep stuff running out of his box. And the document that we're talking about here, the Cutler Twining memo, wasn't signed by anybody. It wasn't signed by Cutler because he was overseas. That's why it wasn't signed. So there was answers to that, but that's not to that issue, but that's not talked about here because he didn't even look at this book. That's not even one of his sources for this. And then he makes this statement about that Dwight Eisenhower would have known. Why would he even need a briefing document? Well, it doesn't matter who any new president's going to want to know. Going to receive a briefing document on this, right? They're going to want to see this. So I don't think that's an issue. And who knows? How does he know that Dwight Eisenhower knew everything at this point? And the document, the briefing document, was not written in a way that would seem like nobody ever heard of it before. It was just presenting information. And it also states on the Majestic 12 document, on the briefing document, it says here, note, this document has been prepared as a preliminary briefing only. It should be regarded as introductory to a full operations briefing intended to follow. And another thing, Eisenhower wasn't part of Majestic 12. I'm sure he probably didn't know everything that there was needed to be known about aliens and the recovery of extraterrestrial craft. So I don't see, it wasn't written like he wouldn't know. It was just providing a history of where it's at, what's going on, and what they've been doing. And how does Graff know that Eisenhower knew everything and wouldn't need a briefing document? That's an absurd one. But then the best one is this. It says, in the end, this is what Garrett Graff writes. He says, in the end, the most damning piece of evidence came from a UFO debunker named Phil Class, he calls him, who spotted a telling extra comma in the briefing paper's date, 18 November 1952. No established contemporaneous government documents featured a comma after the month, but Class could find one specific person who did routinely use a comma in his writings, and he's talking about William Moore himself. So he's saying that one of the UFO researchers, William Moore, he wrote stuff like that. That's what Class tried to say. That may be true, and that's okay, fine and dandy, but however, Class was wrong, and actually Friedman was wrong. He's saying that the government didn't use that kind, because actually Friedman did find examples of that. Let me check it out here. And again, this is from, I'm going back to Top Secret Magic by Friedman. It's on here on page 79. It says here, more importantly, if you spend sufficient time doing actual work in archives, going through many papers of a particular individual, you'll find many different date formats, many different letter formats, and many different style formats emanating from the same office. For example, in letters from MJ-12 member General Walter Bedell Smith to General George Marshall, personal notes, birthday notes, thanks for the greetings, and so on, there are 4 different date formats: 29 December 1952, 26 October, 1954, note the comma, October 7th, 1954, and 12/29/54. So there, he found examples. Actually, Friedman did find examples where the government did use this, did use that format. So Graff is providing incomplete information here in his book, and then that's how he comes to his conclusion. Here's how he concludes. He says, at best, the images of the MJ-12 documents he's talking about were pranks. That's all it was a prank that was played on these UFO researchers, and at worst, that was an intentional outright forgery by at least one of them. So he's accusing these people like Friedman, accusing them, or Jamie Shandera, of a hoax, of making the documents themselves. That's what he's doing. Or that it was a prank by somebody else. And Cosmic Watergate, this was not. So he bases his opinion on debunker information that was later debunked, and he comes to that conclusion. So how's this book is garbage? I mean, it's an incomplete. It's not providing all the information. It's not providing all the data. It's basically omitting. It's lying by omission. That's what it is, and that's why I think you could consider this book a hoax. And then you look at some other stuff here. I'm gonna talk about some other aspects to this. He talks about the Belgian wave. Of course, in 1989, 1990, there was like 3,000 people, right, throughout Belgium that seeing this triangle-shaped object, right? A lot of people, a lot of witnesses over this. What does he conclude? Oh, it was mass hysteria, right? That's what it was, mass hysteria. And then he talks about how in 2011 it was proved that one of the famous images, there's that famous image of the triangle-shaped object with the three big lights and the little light in the middle, right? That was a hoax. There was the guy who allegedly did this. Actually, said his name was Patrick Marischal. Came out in 2011 and claimed it was a hoax. And so, yeah, okay. Big whoop. That doesn't mean anything. For one thing, does that mean everybody else was they were seeing things, I guess, then, right? But anyway, here's what he says. He says subsequent investigations, this is with regard to the sightings themselves. Subsequent investigations largely settled on the idea of a national mass hysteria as a cause. Okay, who settled on? Subsequent investigations largely settled on the idea that it was mass hysteria? Who are these people? Debunkers? I mean, I don't know. Is that what he's saying? That's what it sounds like. But then he talks about the hoax. They call that picture, by the way, the UFO, a petite Rashan. It was determined it was not a spaceship from a distant galaxy, but a panel of painted styrofoam with 3 spots affixed. It would be nearly a decade before the black triangle UFO made famous in Belgium was spotted again, and that next time it would be over the skies of the United States. Okay, that's true. There was a guy that stepped forward, like I said, this Patrick Marischal in 2011 said it was he was the one who hoaxed this photo. Unfortunately for Garrett Graff is that he has since said otherwise now. According to research that was conducted by Roger Stan on Reddit, it says here he recently contacted the photographer and he recanted his story of it being a hoax. In a recent communication on July 7th, 2022, he told me that the photograph was real and that he was proud of it, but wished he had never disclosed it to the media and the world as it caused him a lot of angst. He also told me that no monetary exchange had occurred during the initial disclosure of the photograph to the media. Moreover, when interviewed by the authorities at the time of the initial release of the photograph, he was perceived as a credible and honest civilian. So then he said later on he decided to say it was a hoax. That's what he's saying now. We don't know now. I mean, you have people that do this kind of stuff. They say, oh, it's real. And then 10 years later, oh, no, it was a hoax. Oh, no, it was real. Well, I don't know what the story is, but that should have been in here too. But anyway, the blame, like 2,000 to 3,000 eyewitness accounts, including a lot by military officials and police, that this was all mass hysteria it's bogus. That is a bogus argument. That's a debunker argument. You hear that one all the time. When they have multiple witnesses like that, that's their fallback. Mass hysteria. And that's what he's trying to promote that theory here for the Belgian wave. In this crazy book, in this what I call a hoax. I believe that this book is I call it a hoax because again, it's deception. It's designed to deceive. It's designed to put the world to sleep on UFOs again. And then there was he talks about alien abduction in here. For instance, there was a couple of chapters here: Interrupted Journey, and also it was followed with another chapter here: Sex with Aliens, right? And it gets into like a lot of the researchers, like Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, and really focuses a lot on John Mack. But instead, he presents the information about about what. what these people learned a little bit here, but then it trails away, and it talks about Mac a lot, about some of the personal problems he had when he was a kid, and the issues that he had with Harvard. That Harvard was really upset with him. That it was about his personal struggles. It turned into a story about John Mack rather than focusing on the research of what Mack and others had put forth to the world with regard to alien abduction. Again, it's trying to take your eye. It's like showing you here. Check out the shiny object. Don't worry about what the guy said. Look at the guy's life. He had some issues. He had, this is why he was interested in it. So yeah, it was probably nothing. That's basically what he does there. The whole book is junk like this, and it's very upsetting. And I don't recommend it. Unfortunately, I spent the money on this, but of course, maybe I could steer people away from wasting their money on. Then of course, the Tic Tac incident. He goes through the Tic Tac incident here, has a chapter dedicated to that, but then it ends with an annotation. And wait to hear this annotation. This is the best. It says, years of follow-up investigation have left investigators wondering whether the infrared fighter videos are actually much more mundane. Of course, he's talking about the gimbal and the Tic Tac, right? He said, strange artifacts of camera lens distortion and misperceived distances. And then he has to use Mick West. Mick West, the UFO skeptic, actually debunker, has argued that the strange radar sightings appearing both on the USS Princeton and the USS Theodore Roosevelt, of all the ships in the United States Navy, is hardly a coincidence. Both ships had recently undergone tech and radar upgrades prior to their supposed sightings, and he suspects miscalibrated machines as part of the reason behind the radar contacts. So again, he's trying to dispel it all away. All of it, all away. That's what this book is designed to do. Another thing that, getting back to the MJ-12, there's something else I wanted to mention. There's no mention, of course. He uses Philip Klass's research, end quote, to basically come to his conclusion that there was nothing at all to the MJ-12 documents, right? But however, I don't know, I'm sure some of you are aware that that actually Klass lost $1,000 bet to Stanton Friedman over some of this documents, some of the statements that Klass had made with regard to these documents. Here's from Stanton Friedman's book, Science, Flying Saucers and Science. It says here, UFO expert Philip Klass and others find lexicographic inconsistencies that suggest the whole thing is a hoax. That was a quote from a book by Carl Sagan called "The Demon Haunted World." The Air Force documents say that the Air Force says the documents are bogus, and that and UFO expert Klass and others find lexicographic inconsistencies that suggest the whole thing is a hoax. Klass, according to Friedman, says he seemed to be totally unaware of the fact that Sagan seemed to be totally unaware of the fact that Klass had paid me $1,000 for providing more than 14 documents done in exactly the same pica typeface as the Cutler Twining memo. Klass, on the basis of 9 elite typeface documents obtained by him via mail, he had never been to the Ike Library. Of the 250,000 pages of National Security Council material at the Eisenhower Library, and insisted that they should have been done in elite type. Some lexicographic research. It is interesting that he had told many people of his challenge to me to find any other legitimate examples of the use of the same type and size pica type as used in the memo, but told nobody about paying me. He had offered $100 for each, unfortunately setting at a maximum of 10. He got upset with me for having published our correspondence and a copy of the check. See, so basically what happened here was that Klass made a bet with Friedman. If you could find any kind of other government documents that's using the same kind of typeface as this that's in this Cutler Twining memo, then I'll give you $100 up to $1,000. And Friedman found 14 of them and mailed copies of them to Klass, and then Klass sent him a check, and Friedman framed the check in his office in his house. And then Klass got upset that Friedman talked about this, told people about it later on. But there's nothing that's not mentioned in here. This whole book is a farce. I mean, it's deliberately designed to deceive. That's what it is. It's propaganda. It's I'll tell you what. It's brilliant propaganda. I mean, this is this guy spent a lot of time on this. I give him credit. But he did this. He wrote it in a way where he knew he was going to get attention from the media, because the media, they're not going to give the attention. For instance, Richard Dolan comes out with a new book next week, right? He's not going to be on MSNBC or Fox or CNN talking about his new book, right? No, but Garrett Graff writes a book, an establishment hack. Oh yeah, they're going to bring this guy on because he doesn't buy any of this stuff, and he'll only present half the information. He won't present both sides of a story, and that's what's happened here, folks. The book is junk. And I was very upset reading it, actually, because I feel like I was being deceived. I feel like I got ripped off. I want my money back. Actually, I want my money back for this book. That's what I feel like. I feel like demanding my money back. Actually, Garrett Graff should be asked these kind of questions. Why did you not include all the information? Why did you only use sources who were debunkers, and you didn't even refer to any books that were written by people who actually did real research into this? Why did you only go to debunkers? That doesn't make any sense. Another thing that I wanted to talk about here, I'm going to skip forward here again to this Roswell chapter that he did. Yeah, toward the end of the he ends this chapter on Roswell. Roswell Revisited. This is chapter 42 of the book. He ends this chapter on Roswell talking about that had the Air Force released a lot of this documentation years earlier, like I guess documentation with regard to the dummy drops from the 50s that didn't even happen in 1947, and the mogul balloon nonsense. Had they released that all earlier, then there would have been no Roswell mystery. Like it says here, it says at the very end, it says, all of that, however, didn't matter. By then, the world believed. Roswell was now internationally synonymous with aliens and government cover-ups, whether or not anything had ever actually happened there. As the UFO prankster James Moseley gleefully said at the 50th anniversary party, it's the greatest celebration of a non-event I've ever experienced. Now, why would... Okay, so basically you're towing the Pentagon line wholeheartedly here. You don't care about all the research done by other people like Don Schmitt and Thomas Carey or Stanton Friedman or Kevin Randall. There's a lot of people who did a lot of research on the Roswell. That doesn't matter, but you're going to use the end of your story to help with your narrative. You're going to use a comment from you're calling him even here UFO prankster James Moseley, saying it's the greatest celebration of a non-event I've ever experienced. And that's how the chapter ends, basically. So you're using a comment from somebody who's a liar and a hoaxer and a debunker as to sum up your feelings on Roswell. It's the greatest celebration. This was for the 1997 50th anniversary event where Moseley was still alive at that point, and the greatest celebration ever of a non-event I've ever experienced. Like that comment should hold any weight at all. I mean, who cares what Moseley said? Why don't we hear from people who actually investigated, not some debunker who just sits back and laughs at all this stuff? It doesn't make any sense to me. But this is how this book is presented. It's trash. It's well written, but at the end, it's trash because it's half-assed. It doesn't provide all the information. It only provides the data that supports the hypothesis that the narrative that he's trying to push here. And again, I think it was a smart thing that he did. I mean, if you want to write a UFO book, you see you're well placed in Washington. You already have a couple of books. You're the editor at Politico, and you realize, okay, if I write a book, a debunker style of book, a book that the guerrilla skepticism of Wikipedia organization would love me for, I'll be brought on all these channels to talk about it. I'll be able to promote my book because they'll want to hear from me, right? That's what he did here. I like to see somebody interview Graff and ask him these hard questions. Say, why didn't you? I mean, you do a whole chapter about MJ12 and you don't even talk about the book from Stanton Friedman, but you have stuff from debunkers. You don't even mention in that chapter. It doesn't even talk about the special operating manual, the special operations manual that was leaked in the early 90s that was investigated and reported on extensively by father and son team Robert and Ryan Wood. Right? It didn't talk about that. Didn't even mention that. The special operations manual didn't even mention that at all. I guess he didn't want to touch that one with a 10-foot pole. I guess it would be very difficult to try to explain that away as just a hoax because he would have known that it would have taken a ton of money to put that bucket. If somebody did hoax that, if somebody were to have hoaxed that special operations manual, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars probably to do something like that. There's no way that somebody just sitting in their basement could put something like that together because believe me, me, if you look at that document, it fits in with other government documents, and it would take somebody way too much time to put something like that together for a prank. You're not going to make anything out of it. It's not like anybody ever wrote books about the Special Operations Manual and became multi-millionaires with it. So how do you explain that away? So instead, you don't even mention it in the book. Instead, you just don't you don't include that in your MJ-12 chapter. And then you provide, and then the other part about the MJ-12 chapter, again, you just use you use comments from people like Philip Klass, and that's it. And you don't even talk about what Stanton Friedman discovered, or all the research, the difficult. You look at this book. I mean, this is a very compelling argument that he makes in this book. Now, do I believe in the MJ-12 documents? I do in some of them. I believe in those in the briefing document. I believe that's I'm pretty sure that could be real. I believe that the Cutler-Twining memo could be real. I believe that the Special Operations Manual could be real. There were other documents that were released over time that I don't think were real, that I think were hoaxes. But I have not seen any proof. I've seen more proof that shows that they could be real than they could be false. But that's not presented here. You get a one-sided argument on here. And how could you put something out there like this? You're basically fooling people. You should be objective when you're going to put a book like this together. You're well placed in Washington. You could have been objective about this, but he's not. He was not objective, and I believe it was done. This is just my opinion. Doesn't make me right, but I'm going to say I think he did it because he knew that the only way he's really going to get this book to be successful is because if he takes it from an establishment viewpoint. This is what the Pentagon loves this kind of a book because it basically has a narrative that dispels this idea that there's a cover-up, that there's extraterrestrials here at all in the end. It was funny. I read some other reviews on here that were put out there for this book. For instance, like the AP, there was a review on AP about it, and the review was written by Arnold DeMillo, and this is when the book first came out back in November. And it says here that review ends. It says Graff is unlikely to convert firm skeptics, but he may at least convince them to keep an open mind the next time they read about UFOs or UAP. And I'm wondering, did this guy read the same book I read? Because I mean, if you're a skeptic, this is a dream come true for you. This is basically debunking it for the most part. I mean, there are some things in there. He does have a chapter for the Socorro, New Mexico incident with Lonnie Zamora in 1964, for instance. And for the most part, he doesn't really provide an explanation for that one. I mean, that was a case, though, strangely. That seems to be one of those cases that the Pentagon never really... they didn't try hard. They didn't really try to make a fool out of Lonnie Zamora. Now, you had debunkers like Philip Klass and stuff like that always say, it was a hoax, it was this or that. And then you had Hector Quintanilla, the former head of Project Blue Book at the time, saying that he's made a statement that they never got an explanation for that. And that's how the Air Force has always handled that one. Blue Book does not have an explanation, basically, for the Socorro, New Mexico incident. But... other than that, this book is designed to make people think that there's nothing to this. Again, you end the Tic Tac chapter with comments from Mick West. Mick West, because some former video game programmer thinks that knows more than the military somehow. The military still doesn't have an explanation for it, but yet this former video game programmer has the explanation for it. And what he's doing is Mick West, when it comes, like, for instance, the gimbal, he presents some technical jabberwocky, basically gibberish, mumbo jumbo, to fool people who don't know any better, and they think, he just said blah, 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 and he must be right. Gimbal's not real because Mick West said blah, blah, blah. That's what it seems like to me. I mean, there's been other people who put out their opposing viewpoints on gimbal, and theirs made more sense than what Mick West is saying. But yet, what do we get in Garrett Graff's book? We get Mick West having the final say in an annotation to end the chapter on the Tic Tac and gimbal. I mean, come on. So yeah, this guy knew what he was doing. I give it a big thumbs down. I mean, I find it a fascinating piece of propaganda, and I understand why he wrote it the way he did. Because again, this would give him attention. If he wrote a Richard Dolan style kind of historical book on UFOs, then he knows he's not going to get on the 7 a.m. Morning Joe show, right? He does this, right, which is pro Pentagon, pro secret control group. Well, let's bring this guy on TV. He knows what he's talking about. Again, he's only been researching this since 2020. That's when at some point after 2020 when he heard John Brennan talking about this. So it was late 2020 actually when Brennan made that statement. So 2021, 2022, he does mention the year 2023 in this. So he was still writing this. I guess it wasn't complete yet as of early 2023, and yet. This guy's brought on TV like he's the know-all expert when you have other people out there doing this for like 30, 40 years and they're not being brought on to talk about it. That's because Garrett Graff knew what he was doing when he wrote this book. To me, it's a hoax. A lot of people out there who are going to read this, a lot of people in Washington, like for instance, people in politics who that's all they do is follow politics. They'll read a book like this and they'll walk away thinking, oh, he really nailed it. Now I get it. Now I understand what's going on. He really covered it all, when he actually didn't. He provides one side of an argument, not the rest. He deliberately left out data. How could you write about MJ12 and not talk about this book that Stan Friedman wrote? How could that happen? Anyway, I want to say thank you all for joining me. Until next time.